Hi everyone, welcome back to the second session of today. We've got 3 talks, each followed by a short question and answer session, and then we'll have 5 short talks with a joint Q&A afterwards. Just a reminder to drop your questions into the chat box that you should see on your screen, and for the short talks at the end, if you could either list the speaker name or the talk you're referring to with your questions, that would be really helpful for me identifying which speaker to address those to. So without any further delay, I'd like to introduce our first talk. So we have Takudzwa Gondo, who will be talking about heat stress effects and mitigation in dairy cattle.
Hello everyone, it's Takudzwa Gondo from the University of Saskatchewan. I'll be taking you through my presentation, Integrative Analysis of Heat Stress, Effects and Mitigation in Dairy Cattle, Novel Insights and Implications. So heat stress is one of the most common challenge nowadays in dairy production worldwide. Heat stress occurs when cows can no longer lose sufficient heat to maintain a stable body temperature due to high heat load in their bodies and also due to high ambient temperature and high humidity. So annual livestock losses in the US are estimated to be 1.5 to 1.7 billion, and these losses are attributed to heat stress. And the dairy industry account for approximately 64% of those losses, and these are huge losses. Then the negative challenge or with heat stress is that even short-term heat stress events also have long-lasting negative impacts on the dairy cows. In terms of milk yield losses projections, the losses are estimated to continue to increase by approximately 30% by the year 2050. And these are huge losses when you put this into perspective. On the other hand, when we look also on the issue around climate change, it also exacerbates the frequency as well as the intensity of heat events or heat waves. And this also remains a key challenge in the industry. So when we talk of heat stress in dairy cows, we talk of the temperature humidity index, which is a compound index or a compound measure that is very critical for measuring heat stress severity. It uses temperature and also a relative humidity, and it uses a well-defined formula whereby you use these temperature values and also relative humidity values to come up with the temperature humidity index value. So there are certain thresholds or key values which are very essential to interpret this temperature humidity index. For instance, when the temperature humidity index is less than 68, we see cows being more comfortable and also being extremely or having exhibiting their normal behavior. Then when the temperature humidity index is now between 68 to 78, we start to see mild to moderate heat stress because of this heat stress event. Then also when the temperature humidity index is now more than 78, we start to see a severe heat stress, and this one is linked to negative impacts on dairy cattle. On the other hand, we also see that high temperature humidity index values are positively correlated with increasing levels of stress and also even associated risk in dairy cows. So there are several challenges that comes with heat stress in dairy production. So these challenges also impact dairy cow welfare and also even productivity and production. Then we also talk of economic losses, which are huge when it comes to the effects of heat stress. For instance, we can talk of reduced milk yield and even impaired reproduction and other health-related risk. So when the ambient temperature is high and the cows enter the periods of heat stress whereby they fail to maintain their normal body temperature, we start to see increased behaviors such as increased panting and also a drooling of saliva as the cows try to lose as much heat as possible through panting. And this can also result in carbon dioxide expelling, which also reduce the saliva buffering capacity in the rumen. And this often result in acidosis related risk. And also on the other hand, we also start to see more effects on reduced milk production, and this can also even be attributed to a reduced feed intake as the cows reduce their feed intake as a mechanism to try and minimize production of further heat through processes such as heat of fermentation. We also see even reduced rumination as a result of decreased feed intake. On the other hand, when we try to quantify these production losses, we observed that in this meta-analysis, dry matter intake was reduced very significantly by 19.3% under heat stress events. And this is a major reduction, which also impacts production as well as productivity on a dairy farm. We also talk of energy corrected milk, which can decrease as far as 17.9% during heat stress events. Then we also talk of even a reduction in milk composition, specifically milk protein, by 3.9% under cows which have been exposed to heat stress. Then when we look at milk fat, the results have been also very inconsistent, especially between seasonal studies and chamber studies. However, on the seasonal studies, they have reported an 8.3% decrease in milk fat, and this can usually be attributed to a decreased feed intake accompanied by a reduced rumination rate, which tend to affect or which tend to result in the decline in the milk production and also a decline in milk composition. Well, so when we look at the chamber studies, they observed a 2.3% increase in milk fat, and this differences between the chamber studies and also the seasonal studies, they can be attributed to an interplay of environmental factors and also even metabolic adaptations on milk fat. Then when cows undergo heat stress, we start to see indicators, and this includes the respiration rate, which can increase as far as 60 to 120 breaths per minute under severe heat stress events, while the normal breaths per minute can be around 20 to 40. Then we also see increased rectal temperature, which is an indicator of an elevated body temperature. It can go as far as more than 40 degrees Celsius compared to about 38.7 degrees Celsius under normal conditions. Then we also see increased pending scores as the cows increase their pending such that they can reduce or lose as much heat as possible. And this increase in pending scores indicate distress and also the occurrence of negative impacts such as reduced dry matter intake and so forth. We also see behavioral changes which are also well aligned with heat stress events. For example, one of these is increased water intake, because when the cows undergo a heat stress, they drink a lot of water as a way of trying to reduce their body temperature by processes such as urination. They can lose heat through urination. Then we also talk of reduce the line as the cows stand more, such that they can lose as much heat as possible by convection. So when the cows lie down, they will lose less heat due to the conduction with the ground. And this reduced lying rate also result in increased cases of lameness, which can also be a very huge challenge in the dairy industry. We also talk of reduced rumination, because as the cows reduce their feed intake, there is a reduced rumination because of the reduced feed in the rumen, and this can also have ripple effects on production, from milk yield and also even on milk composition. Then we also see increased shade seeking behavior, whereby the cows seek shade under trees and even under any mechanically erected structures. Then also we have reproductive effects of heat stress. That's the bad thing about heat stress, is that it even affects the reproductive cycles of the cows. So we start to see decreased conception rates as there is altered estrus and also irregular estrus patterns, and also difficultness in observing heat, and also difficultness in timing artificial insemination. And this also even result in reduced conceptions. And also on the other hand, we also talk of increased early embryonic death, which can be attributed to several mechanisms. And this also means huge losses to the dairy industry. As a result, these also result in production losses as well as productivity losses, and also time losses on the dairy farm. On the other hand, we also talk of the immune impact of this heat stress. For instance, when the cows undergo periods of heat stress, we see the cows making behaviors and also making changes in their systems to try and adapt and lose as much heat as possible. This is one system which they adapt is the reduction in blood flow to the internal gut and also other internal organs, and more blood is redirected to the surface of the body as a mechanism to lose as much heat as possible. Then this also result in a reduction or in starving the cells of the gut or the tight junction gut cells. They are starved of oxygen and also even of blood supply because of this reduction of blood flow. As a result, the tight junction barrier function is compromised. When this tight junction barrier function is compromised, it means there is translocation of endotoxins, for instance, lipopolysaccharides. And once these are translocated inside, they can launch an immune system and an inflammatory response occur. On the other hand, we also see a more increased somatic cell count as the cows undergo this process of leaky gut, as well as susceptibility to mastitis and other infectious diseases and other challenges that comes with compromised immune system. We also talk of environmental mitigation and innovative cooling strategies, which is very essential to mitigate against this heat stress. We talk of sprinklers and fans, which is very common in many dairy barns. These are very effective at reducing the respiration rate as well as even the body temperature. They can reduce the body temperature by approximately 0.3 to 0.7 degrees Celsius, which is very effective. Then we also talk of the perforated air ducts and evaporative cooling systems, which are very essential for equally distributing cold air in the whole barn. And these are also very essential for enhancing convective and also even evaporative heat losses. Then we also talk of dynamic cooling systems, which are sensor-driven systems. These also reduce water use by approximately 57%, while at the same time maintaining high level of efficiency. Then we also talk of shade and also ventilation provision, which is very essential for improving the cow's welfare, and also cows will spend more time grazing, especially when the environmental temperatures are favorable. We also talk of the nutritional strategies which are used to buffer heat stress, and these are becoming a main topic of discussion, especially nowadays. We talk of betaine supplementation, for instance, which can be supplemented in the diets by approximately 80 grams per day, and this can lower cortisol levels. Cortisol is associated with stress in dairy cows. We also talk even of increased antioxidant capacity, where there is a reduced cell death because of this supplementation. Then also even talk of increased milk yield by 1.5 kg per day, which is a plus for the farmers. Then we also talk of linseed oil supplementation by approximately 400 grams per day. This one can increase summer milk yield by approximately 1.5 kg. Then we also talk of altered milk fatty acid profile, whereby there is an altered proportions of milk fat acid profiles, such as the de novo synthesized, the preformed fatty acids, and also the mixed fatty acids. And these are also very essential for determining the overall fat composition of milk. Then we also talk of the improved rumination time, which is very essential to result in milk production and also even on milk composition. Then we also talk of reduced core body temperature in grazing cows, which have been observed by supplementation of linseed oil. Then we also talk of chromium yeast supplementation, which can increase milk protein synthesis and also even regulation of rumen microbiota to maintain a stable rumen microbiota, and also enhance the antioxidant capacity, whereby it reduces the cell death due to changes in body temperatures and so forth. And on the other end, we talk of the effects of these chromium yeast is that they do not affect dry matter intake at all. This is what has been observed. Then also talk of the genetic and breed-specific differences. For instance, when we talk of the Jersey crossbreeds, they have shown a high temperature immediate thresholds before they start to reduce their milk yield. For instance, they can show these temperature immediate thresholds of about 77, while the Westerns can show these temperature immediate index of 72, and before they start to decrease their milk yield. So this underscores the differences between different cow breeds. Then we also talk of the sleek allele, which is the genetic makeup which is responsible for heat resilience and also reduction of thermal discomfort, and also it even improves the longevity of cows. So this one is pretty common, especially in cows that are found in the regions which experience high severity of heat stress, and also on cows that are having this genetic makeup. Then also talk of breeding programs which offer long-term and also enhancing heat tolerance. These are long-term solutions. However, they are usually expensive to implement and even too expensive to research and develop. However, they are very beneficial when it comes to the long implementation against this heat stress. And then we also talk of the precision technologies and behavior monitoring tools, which is becoming also a topic of discussion nowadays when we talk of artificial intelligence and also even a utilization of modern technologies. So these precision technologies can involve accelerometers and even Roman molasses and also monitoring collars, which enable real-time monitoring of cows for cow behavior. So this can automate systems whereby they can adjust cooling based on individual cow data, and also they have shown improved line time and even reduced pending, which is very essential. On the other hand, they also facilitate early intervention such that we mitigate stress impacts early, way before we start to even see the effects of heat stress on cows. Now, in conclusion, important and also very essential that we understand that heat stress is a complex challenge in dairy production. Hence, it requires an integrated approach of solutions to combat it. And these solutions can include the cooling strategies and also even technology and monitoring tools, as well as the targeted nutrition approach, which is becoming essential nowadays. Then also the genetic selection for effective and long-term mitigation of heat stress. Then it's very important that we also understand that precision and tailored approaches or precision technologies are the future. Therefore, utilizing these technologies for early intervention is very important in many dairy farms, while at the same time we maintain or reduce cost of monitoring these animals. Then it's also very essential that we understand a long-term or research need to fully understand the chronic impacts of heat stress, and also even to develop sustainable adaptive strategies for improved animal management and also for improved animal welfare, such that our farmers can have high productivity and also even improved production when they are faced even with these heat stress events. Thank you. You can ask questions.
Brilliant. That was a really interesting talk and summary of different interventions there. I'd invite the speaker to turn on their camera and microphone so that we can have some questions. And I'd invite all the delegates to submit their questions into the chat. I'll just wait for the speaker's camera to load. Hi there. I'm going to take ChatGPT to ask you a question, if that's okay. So you listed a whole host of different interventions there. Could you give me an example of how you might combine some of these different interventions in practice?
Well, thank you so much. That is a great question. So usually farmers are often recommended to use a combination of methods. For instance, we can have the use of collars and sensors that can detect any changes in heat and then implement early interventions. Then we can also even have structures such as sheds on the farm, which is also acts as another mechanism to combat this heat stress way early before we start to see some negative effects. So both the combinations of these two can work together hand in hand to support each other. Where one method can fail, the other one can take over.
Brilliant, thank you. And I've also got a question from Stephen Wickens in the chat. And he says that modelling has shown that within Europe, many dairy cows will experience extreme heat stress as the climate warms, making current housing untenable. Do you think the breed of cows used in Europe will need to shift towards more heat-resistant breeds, such as those used elsewhere?
Yes, I think it's very important that we recognize that climate is changing, and we are going to see more of these heat stress events. And it's also very essential that we invest more into the genetics and also change and adapt as climate change. So it's very essential that farmers on the Europe side, it's not just about Europe,
Mm.
worldwide, it's essential that we adopt genes that are resilient and also that are adaptable to these changing climates. So it's also like a need for every stakeholder within the livestock industry, the geneticists, the farmers, as well as the researchers, to put ideas together so that we combat this challenge.
No, that's great. And that's a really nice point about stakeholder collaboration there as well. I'm just conscious of sticking to time, so I think we've kind of hit our mark on your slot. So thank you so much for your talk, and thank you so much for your question answers as well. It's really appreciated.
Thank you so much.
So we'll now move on to our second talk of this morning. So we have Lisa Yang, who's going to talk about a qualitative exploration of Chinese egg producers' views on cage-free production systems.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lisa Qing Yang, and I'm from China. So this presentation is part of my PhD research project. And through this research project, I want to identify effective strategies to encourage Chinese egg producers to adopt cage-free housing systems. So China is one of the world's top egg producers and consumers. In 2023, more than 3.3 billion laying hens were raised for eggs, and nearly 90% of them were kept in conventional battery cages. Over the past 5 years, we've seen some movement towards cage-free systems, mainly driven by global animal welfare concerns and international company commitments to go cage-free by 2025. Since there's no animal welfare law for poultry in China, going cage-free is completely voluntary for the producers. And because there are so many laying hens are still kept in cages, even a small shift could improve the lives of millions of chickens. Many factors shape how producers choose housing systems. In Europe, legislation plays a big role. Other factors include social pressure, profits, resources, knowledge and skills, and views on animal welfare. In Asia, including China, similar factors apply, except for the legal side. While there is a lot of research focused on European farmers, studies in Asia often examine multiple stakeholder groups across various countries. However, Chinese producers may hold different views from other stakeholders and their European counterparts, so understanding their unique context is important to developing effective strategies to support cage-free adoption. In our study, we aim to investigate the Chinese egg producers' perceived opportunities and challenges in deciding to or not to transition to cage-free systems. We used the cone-bee model to explore what influenced producers' housing system decisions. Based on this model, one's behavior is shaped by 3 elements: capability, opportunity, and motivation. Capability includes both physical and psychological ability. Motivation covers automatic and reflective motivators, and opportunity refers to resources and social pressure. I used purposive and snowball sampling to recruit 15 large-scale egg producers for phone interviews. They were farm owners, managers, or senior leaders of large production companies. They're from China's top 10 egg-producing provinces. Those working in large production companies did not work with animals every day, but they were decision makers for the farm or the company, which suits our purpose of understanding their decision making. For our participants, cage farm sizes ranged from 11,000 to 30 million hens, while cage-free farms ranged from 10,000 to 200,000 hens. 6 producers used only cage-free systems, including single-level, multi-level, or free-range. 4 producers used only conventional cages, and the remaining 5 used both. We used template analysis to code the data and identified 18 subthemes under the COMB framework. So here is a very quick summary. In the next section, I will walk you through the key findings and share quotes from participants to highlight the perceived opportunities and challenges around adopting cage-free systems. The first set of results relates to capability, and most of these were barriers, such as limited knowledge about cage-free systems, lack of management skills, difficulty educating consumers, and low tolerance for slow returns. In the summary, factors marked with a plus sign are seen as positive, while those with a minus are challenges. So some are marked with both symbols because different producers saw them as either a help or a constraint. The first capability-related barrier was limited knowledge about cage-free systems. Most participants were familiar with the term cage-free, but some cage producers often confused it with single-level or free-range systems. Aviary systems, which are seen as a modern cage-free option, were not well known. As one cage producer put it, "I haven't heard of aviary systems before." The second capability-related barrier was a lack of skills in managing cage-free systems. Some producers felt that it is inherently harder to manage cage-free systems, and that vaccination is a significant challenge. The third capability-related barrier mostly came from cage-free producers, who felt they could not educate consumers about cage-free eggs. They stated that awareness of animal welfare is limited in China, and they lack both the means and the motivation to change this situation. This makes it harder to grow demand and run a successful cage-free business. Resilience to slow financial returns was a positive factor for cage-free producers, but a barrier for those using cages. One free-range producer said, "It is important not to expect quick profits." In contrast, cage producers wanted faster returns and were less likely to try newer, less familiar cage-free systems. The second set of results covers opportunity-related factors, namely social influences and access to physical resources. Producers were influenced by consumers, peer producers, government, animal welfare groups, and farm leadership. At the same time, a lack of trusted certification schemes, funding, land, and skilled workers were major barriers to adopting cage-free systems. Perceived consumer support acted as a driver for some producers and a barrier for others. Free-range producers were encouraged by local demand, and some producers adopted aviary systems because of large companies' cage-free commitments. However, others felt demand was weak, with few consumers willing to pay more for cage-free eggs. Some cage-free producers saw cage producers as a threat, accusing them of falsely labeling caged eggs as cage-free. As one participant said, their eggs aren't truly cage-free, they're caged, so the market gets disrupted. This links to a broader issue, the lack of government support. Many participants believed the government should regulate cage-free certification and labeling, but the government is not motivated to get involved in this issue. Limited engagement from animal welfare organizations also posed opportunity and a barrier. While those groups endorsed the certified cage-free eggs, the limited outreach meant consumers were often unfamiliar with them and did not recognize their credibility, which reduced the perceived value of certified products. In addition, farm owners and top-level leaders played a key role in deciding which housing systems to adopt, especially for farm managers who followed their lead. Transitioning to and running cage-free farms takes a lot of resources. Producers who lacked reliable certification schemes, funding, land, or skilled workers saw these gaps as major barriers. The final set of funding is about motivation. Producers' motivation to go cage-free was shaped by their views on profitability, confidence in handling challenges, willingness to take risks, intentions to transition, and how they saw themselves socially and professionally. The first motivation-related factor is profitability, which was a key motivator for going cage-free. As one free-range producer said, "It's a business. Profit comes first. If it's profitable, you can do it." But when consumer demand and profits aren't so clear, producers are hesitant to invest in such a high-cost, uncertain market. The second motivation-related factor was observed in cage-free producers, who showed strong confidence and a can-do attitude in facing challenges such as financing and technical issues. They talk about securing funding, negotiating prices with buyers, and gradually building experience to improve their practice. This proactive mindset has helped them sustain their cage-free operations over time. The third motivation-related factor is producers' willingness to take risks. Compared to cage producers, those running cage-free farms were generally more open to risk. One cage producer said they would not consider cage-free systems because of market uncertainty and potential financial losses. In contrast, a cage-free producer shared that he was not just driven by profit. He wanted to do something meaningful, even if it was challenging. The fourth motivation-related factor is an intention to transition. All the cage-free producers showed strong intentions to maintain or even expand their cage-free farms, despite the challenges. Free-range producers felt confident about their markets, while barn producers were motivated by future demand from companies with 2025 cage-free commitments. One said, "I want to try and see if cage-free is feasible." In contrast, some cage producers confirmed there was no intention to transition. The last motivation-related factor was how producers saw themselves, that is, their social and professional identities. Cage-free producers viewed their systems as more socially responsible, benefiting both animal welfare and human well-being. In contrast, cage producers emphasized the affordability and the efficiency of their systems, especially in meeting the needs of low-income consumers so they did not want to change to cage-free. Here are the key takeaways and conclusions of our study. The results suggest that different dryers and barriers influenced whether producers adopted and maintained cage-free systems. Confirmed consumer demand and profitability are key motivators. Therefore, market-based intervention are crucial for encouraging the adoption of cage-free. Cage-free producers are more willing and committed to cage-free than cage producers. And barn producers need more support than free-range producers, especially in connecting with buyers. Since different farms' resources vary, short-term strategies should focus on supporting resourceful cage-free producers rather than trying to convert cage producers. Corporate buyer engagement and trusted certification schemes are crucial to sustaining the cage-free sector. In the long run, building technical capacity and collaborating with stakeholders will be essential for improving animal welfare. Further research is needed on incentives for corporate buyers to source cage-free eggs and on the acceptance of certification in China. This is the end of my presentation. I want to thank my PhD supervisors and the founder for my PhD project. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for that great talk. If I could invite you to turn your camera and your audio on. We've already got a few questions coming in for you, which I just think shows how interesting and exciting your talk was. But if I could ask you a question first. You highlighted in your summary there that market-based solutions will be really important for driving things forward. Could you give me an example of what some of these might be?
Yes. Hi, Beth. I'm not sure if people can see me. It seems like my camera is not coming up.
I can see
anyway,
you, so.
Okay, good. Just to answer your question, I think based on my study, one of the potentially most effective market-based strategy, is to encourage the international food businesses and corporates who have the 2025 cage-free commitments to fulfill their commitments. So encourage those big companies, international companies, to buy cage-free eggs. So that can be a big help for the large-scale commercial farms, especially for those who are not smaller scale free range farms, but large scale using aviary and single level systems.
Thank you. And I've got a question from Stephen Wickens in the chat here. So you talked about, some of the producers talked about the importance of government support and legislation. Do you think that's something that's likely to happen or come into place?
I think it is likely to happen. We just don't know when, and we don't know how long it's going to take. So China does have its unique political context in terms of legislation development and the decision-making process on legislation. And so we have seen there is that aspiration for animal welfare legislation here. It has been there for decades, at least since 2010 when I started work in the field of animal welfare. So it has been talked about, has been discussed by the academia, by the legal experts, by various stakeholders. Unfortunately, we haven't seen it today. And in China right now, the national policy is still focused on food security and food safety. And we all know that China has like one of the largest population in the whole world. So that is still the focus of the government. And that also means all the agricultural policies still focus on increase the food supply, and we want the maximize the efficiency to have the output of agricultural goods rather than lower efficiency and less output of higher welfare systems. But I do have the hope it's going to happen. We just don't know. That's why in my study I put it that is a long-term strategy, and we hope it can happen, but it cannot be the short-term focus.
Brilliant, thank you. So I think we've got time for one more question, and I have a question from Beth McKeague in the chat. She says, it's a great talk. Have you made any steps to engage with market-based stakeholders using the findings from your study?
Yes. I have a third paper that has been finished and want to submit probably in a couple of months. So I interviewed some corporates, especially the people in the procurement of cage-free eggs here in China. So I interviewed them, and I also talked to people who manage the cage-free certification schemes here in China, trying to understand the dynamics of developing cage-free sector. So I do have some findings there to see how to engage those corporates so that they can accelerating their procurement so that we can support the production here in China.
No, that sounds great. That sounds really interesting. I look forward to reading it when it's out. And thank you very much again, Lisa, for your talk and your answers. We're now going to move on to our third talk of the session by Wasseem Emam, who's going to be talking about advancing farm fish welfare in Africa.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you to UFAW for organizing this excellent conference. So today I'll be talking to you about our work in getting fish welfare on agenda in Egyptian and Kenyan aquaculture. So this is a part of the world where the animal welfare debate has not traditionally extended to aquatic animals, and actually even the welfare of terrestrial animals tends to be quite poor. So I don't think I need to convince this audience about why fish welfare matters, but basically there are ethical reasons for caring about fish welfare, given that the science has shown that fish can feel pain, and there's also economic reasons to treat animals in our care better, and as traditionally that you can have lower mortalities and better field quality. And lastly, higher welfare practices in aquaculture are closely linked with a reduced ecological impact. So, for example, through better feed distribution and less wastage of food, that is environmental impact, which means that there's an environmental reason for caring about fish welfare too. So for food systems to be truly sustainable, they have to take animal welfare into consideration. As for the common welfare issues that we see in African aquaculture specifically, so a lot of them are, the usual suspects that we see in other parts of the world, things like overcrowding, poor water quality, and, slaughter practices that are not so humane, but there's also things like handling and transportation that tends to be of fry in particular, like juvenile fish, that tends to be suboptimal, and there's an absolute lack of any kind of regulation or welfare standards. I'll talk more about that later. So where do we come into this? And when I say we, I mean Ethical Seafood Research, or ESR. So ESR is the organization that I represent. It was founded in 2022 to fill an important niche. We felt that there was no one really working in Africa to improve animal welfare in aquaculture specifically. So ESR is a non-profit in the UK, Spain, as well as Kenya and Egypt. It primarily takes a research approach. That's the majority of our work, but we also get involved in education and in training workshops. And we are mostly active on the ground through working with farmers and other stakeholders. And we also do some policy work. So in Zanzibar, we worked with the Ministry of Blue Economy and Fisheries to develop a high welfare aquaculture strategy, since the region wants to get into finfish farming from seaweed farming. So we thought it was a good opportunity. So aquaculture in Africa, like with other places, is experiencing very rapid growth. Actually, in fact, Africa has the world's fastest growing aquaculture sector. The sector is currently in a bit of a transition as it shifts from mostly extensive systems to more intensive forms of production, and that's why we think it's an opportune time currently to bring in animal welfare considerations before we see the sector move into more intensive practices. So given that we've outlined that fish are sentient and that it's large, they're farmed in large numbers, and the fast growth of African aquaculture, we see that there are serious welfare risks that come with that, but at the same time, major opportunities. Yeah, so if we break down African aquaculture production by country, we can see on the right there that Egypt is by far the largest producer in the continent, and that's why we focus a big proportion of our research and advocacy work there. But it's also where I'm from originally, so that also makes sense. So now I'll talk about the approach that we took for our work in Egypt and the lessons we learned there. So we've already established that Egypt is by far the biggest aquaculture player in Africa, but actually even globally is one of the top 6. And then in terms of tilapia production, which is the main species that's farmed in all of Africa, we are number 3. So what that means is that there's a high potential for scalable welfare tools in Egypt. Now, to understand the current state of tilapia farming in the country, so first, as I mentioned, it's mostly tilapia being farmed, but most of that tilapia farming is happening in that area in the Nile Delta, which is a red circle around that on the left there, sorry. And then just remember that what most tilapia farming in Egypt is carried out in these, basic earthen ponds, as you can see on the right here. So that's still fairly low technology. And the difference there between, Egypt and places like even other parts of Africa or places like Asia or South America is that we don't see so many cages. They're not actually officially allowed, even though we have some. And it's still quite basic in terms of practices, so we don't have any routine fish vaccination programs that we see elsewhere. And as I mentioned on the last slide, it's because these systems are rudimentary or basic that we feel that welfare interventions can be impactful. But the question is, what can we actually do to improve tilapia welfare? So that's what we set out to ask ourselves. So in 2023, we carried out a series of focus group discussions and workshops with key stakeholders in the major tilapia farming areas in the country. So there's some photos here from those workshops. The aim was to understand the current state of play, the current practices and farming, and to see what stakeholders across the value chain understood about animal welfare. And then we also complemented that with a survey to dive deeper into these issues. So to quickly summarize the main things we learned from these workshops, as well as the survey. Firstly, hardly anyone that attended our workshops was familiar with the term animal welfare, let alone fish welfare. In fact, we don't even have a good word for animal welfare in Arabic that transmits that concept well. And when it comes to fish farming, that's an even more foreign concept. We also learned that hardly any farmers actually monitor the quality of the water in their ponds. And then very few farms keep reliable records of their management practices. And we confirmed that, well, we already knew that, but we had confirmation that the way that the fish are harvested is likely to be highly stressful and very, very likely to be detrimental to their welfare. So that's a part of the production process that we thought was most likely to be the most stressful. But at the same time, we saw a keenness to learn more about fish welfare, and that's something that was very encouraging. So we heard many participants express an interest in improving their water quality, both through increased monitoring and through the use of additives. And we saw an interest in using technology to improve record keeping and harvesting practices. And then lastly, we identified that there was these mobile harvest teams that go from farm to farm, and it felt like that could be a good opportunity for reaching many farms in a cost-effective way. So, given the lack of record keeping and because workshop participants mentioned an interest in adopting new technology, it felt like a great time to partner with FAI farms to roll out their tilapia welfare app to Egyptian fish farmers. FAI farms are a UK-based food systems consultancy, and they have quite a lot of involvement in the aquaculture sector globally. And a few years ago, they developed this app for monitoring tilapia welfare, which was based on a tilapia welfare protocol that they were involved in developing. So what that app does is provides a very easy, straightforward way for farmers to assess how their fish are doing. All they do is enter some basic measurements into the app, and then the app gives the farmer a welfare score, and that gives them an indication of how their fish are doing, and provides recommendations for how to improve their practices. And so far, we've had great success with the rollout of this app. We've trained a few hundred assessors on our team and external in the use of the app, and we've used the training of trainer structure to reach more people. And that's, of course, on top of the hundreds of farmers that we've been training. Last year alone, we completed over 4,000 assessments. That's 1,000 individual farms, which is basically something around 15% of the entire tilapia sector in the country. And as I mentioned, that's one of the world's largest tilapia farming tilapia sectors. So that's quite a large, quite a big achievement. And in terms of fish lives, we estimate that that's something around 260 million tilapia that we assessed the welfare of and hopefully improved. So the tilapia welfare app, which is based on a tilapia welfare protocol, it assesses welfare in 4 domains as opposed to the classic 5 domains, or just takes 4 of them. That's environment, that's nutrition, that's health and behavior. And the app basically takes the objective science-based indicators from the protocol and adapts them to make them easy for like farm level use, operationalize them actually to say. So from the rollout of the app across 1,000 farms last year, we saw that there was consistent patterns of low welfare. Actually, you can see in the graph in the middle there that there was the average score on the left is at 62%. So that was the average score, which is not great, but it's not terrible either. But we actually saw over the lifetime of the project that it did increase, which is promising. So these consistent patterns of low welfare practices tended to be related to water quality management, lack of it really. So underfeeding and very few health checks being carried out. But we did see that by visiting farms repeatedly, the same farms, and by giving them tailored feedback and sort of developing that rapport, we start to see the notable improvements that I mentioned, and over time, positive changes in behavior and in practices. So the biggest changes that we saw were in farmer awareness, considering that many of them were new to basic practices, such as water quality monitoring and so on. And things like feeding appropriately, not just for the fish to grow, but also for in an even way that more fish get to eat equal amounts, let's say. And we saw great opportunities for scalable, low-cost improvements in those areas. So water quality monitoring and introducing basic health and nutrition tools. But also, we think that behavior as a welfare indicator could be quite impactful. So, because of the major lack of water quality monitoring we're also running a case study currently with FAI farms to show why monitoring pond water quality is so important. And because our preliminary work showed that the harvest process was likely to be particularly stressful, we felt that this was somewhere where intervention could be potentially really impactful. And that's why we're running a project currently with Nautilus Collaboration based in Australia to look for ways to improve practices during the whole process of harvest. So that's feed withdrawal, crowding, and slaughtering, but we'll be focusing on ice slurry in particular. Moving on to Kenya, where we've applied much of the learnings from Egypt. So Kenya is in the top 10 or so aquaculture producing countries in Africa. Like Egypt, tilapia is the most dominant species being farmed, but there are also other species like catfish and rainbow trout. One difference between Egypt and Kenya is that we see a lot more cage farming in Kenya, and the majority of those cages are in the western riparian region around Lake Victoria. But there are other areas as well. And one thing that's unique in Kenya is that there's a huge demand for tilapia. It's far greater than supply. So there's a big gap in demand there that needs to be met, which means that Kenya is currently dependent on imports to meet that level of demand. But it also means that there's a great scope for aquaculture operations to increase. And this is something that the government is keen to promote as part of its drive to realize what they call the blue economy, not just them, many places around the world. And for these reasons, we expect that Kenya can easily go on to be one of the top aquaculture producers in Africa in the coming years, which again suggests it's an opportune time to be improving farm fish welfare before the sector undergoes rapid intensification. And we believe that the government there is particularly amenable to that approach. So in Kenya, we tried a slightly different approach to Egypt. Given that the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Fisheries there has extension services for fishers and aquaculture, we thought, well, why don't we try to see if we can use the extension officers themselves to roll out the tilapia welfare app instead of reaching farmers and using our team of assessors and practitioners and so on, and veterinarians, sorry. So we trained around, the extension officers in Kenya, they are mandated by the government to visit farms regularly, and they have to be able to evidence to their superiors that they're conducting regular visits. So we thought it could actually help them make their work more efficient. And in March of this year, we trained around 35 of the most active extension officers in the counties surrounding Lake Victoria in the use of the app. And it's still early days, but so far the results have been promising. So this figure, this is basically a display that you get on a dashboard that comes with the app, and it just shows you many different parameters, but we look at the welfare score over time in particular to see the trend. And actually here you can see the score on the left, the average global score is 62%, which is a bit higher than the score in Egypt, the average score. But of course, we had a lot more farms that we're monitoring there. This is just since March, But actually, one thing that's interesting is that we've seen a slight dip in the score over the 2 months or so that the project's been running. Of course, it's still very early days, so we haven't really dug into why this might be. But I would suspect that it's because there's more new farms being assessed by the extension officers as opposed to being the same farms reassessed again and again, as was the case when our team was carrying out a study last year in Egypt. So the cross-cutting lessons, what worked and what didn't work. We found that repeating the visits over time allowed us to tailor advice and to build relationships and rapport with farmers, and that made a big difference in the success of the project. And that training farmers to notice behavioral indicators and change in behavior was also quite impactful. And the use of an app that was simple and that provided visual feedback was also quite worked, basically. And what didn't work is expecting farmers they themselves to really interact with complex indicators. So we need to break it down for them and have simple things that they can enter. So the lessons for other countries is that the approach that we have taken in Egypt can be transferred, and we have in fact transferred it. And combining science, technology, and capacity building is a winning combination, and that the app helps to align welfare with farm productivity. So the next steps are to keep going with the training, given that we identified gaps and that we had people expressing interest in that. There was also a need to roll out more tools, such as the app, water testing kits, humane slaughter technology, and also explore the possibility of bringing in certification. And I'll close by saying that fish welfare is foundational to sustainable aquaculture, and that even small interventions can yield massive welfare gains, as we've seen, and that's crucial to keep fish on the welfare agenda. Thank you for listening, and thank you to all our collaborators, FAI Farms, Aquavet Egypt, Kafr Sheikh University, Royal Holloway University, and of course all the farmers and the stakeholders that participated in the study, without whom this would not have been a success. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Wasseem, for that really interesting talk. And I think the level of interest in that is reflected by the questions that are coming through in the thread. So I'm going to start off with a question by Berta Nielsen, who says, many of the animal welfare improvements you've talked about will also improve production or reduce environmental impact, which is great. But some are only protecting the animal, such as the use of stunning at slaughter. Is it difficult to get these animal welfare improvements introduced in practice?
Yes, that's that's actually one of the biggest struggles. So stunning and slaughter, we're always having to link it to improved fillet yield, even though in Egypt the fish are eaten whole mostly. So that's been a difficult one. But you're always having to find, especially in the context of a place like Egypt and a bit in Kenya, that tilapia is a poor man's fish, really. So there isn't really much value. It's not sold in the major supermarkets. There isn't the kind of levers or sort of incentives that you might find elsewhere. So we're always looking for ways to link it to the things that farmers care about the most. In this case, reduced reduced spoilage and so on. Yeah.
That's great. And then I've also got another question here that says, other initiatives that have looked to raise standards have found that an element of competition between farmers can also help drive improvements. Are the scores that you have within the app shared only with the individual farmer, or they're used as benchmarks at all? Or
Yeah, I don't know who that question came from, but it's an interesting one. I didn't talk about this at all, but well, and there are some privacy issues around sharing things between farmers. But in Kenya, what we've done is we've created like a pool of extension officers, and they know, the counties know about the scores, and they use them to incentivize their officers. And we had a bit of a competition that the county that has the highest scores or the highest number of assessments at the end would get a free water testing kit. So yeah, it's something we're looking at gamifying, let's say.
yeah, oh, that's really, really interesting. I'm really conscious of time and we need to move on to our short talks, but there are a whole array of different questions for you in the chat. So is it okay if people with questions drop you an email?
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm sure they'd love us to. Thank you very, very much, Wasseem. So
Thank
now
you.
we'll move on to our 5 short talks. So just a reminder, if you are asking questions for these in the chat, please could you make a note of which speaker or which talk you'd like your question to go to.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining this session. My name is Wanju, and today I'm going to share my research on the cause of the relinquishment in Taiwan, the pivotal role of owners' knowledge and motivation. Let me start with a bit of context. Taiwan has about 23 million people. In the 1990s, stray dogs reached over 1.3 million. At that time, only 20% were neutered due to cultural and religious beliefs. Many people thought releasing dogs into the world was more compassionate than euthanasia. So in 2017, Taiwan officially banned euthanasia for shelter animals. This zero euthanasia policy aimed to protect the animals, but it also caused shelters to become overcrowded and under-resourced. Many animals now live in stressful and unhealthy conditions. In this context, our study explored the root cause of dog relinquishment, focusing on owners' relative factors like knowledge, motivation, and where they got their dogs. So we collect 461 responses with 444 valid samples. And based on the data collected, we found that owners with higher knowledge levels tend to adopt dogs from reputable kennels. They had emotional motivations and use positive training methods, which often led to fewer behavior problems. This finding highlights a clear chain of influence starting from an owner's level of knowledge and motivation, which shape both where they get their dog and how they train them. This, in turn, affects the dog's behavior and the overall stability of the relationship. Understanding this full picture helps explain why some ownership journeys succeed and others end in relinquishment. In light of these findings, we propose three key strategies to address the problem at its root. 1. Stronger regulation, breeding, and sales, such as banning the display of dogs with unclear origins in pet shops. 2. Enhance owner education, promoting awareness of animals protection laws, neutering, and microchipping. And last one, early socialization and training programs to encourage responsible behavior and long-term commitment to pet care. By focusing on owners, not just the animals, Taiwan can take a meaningful step toward building a more responsible dog ownership culture. And thank you for your listening.
Hello everyone, my name is Rebecca Boys and today I'm going to talk about some of my postdoc research which has focused on cetaceans, so it's whales, dolphins and porpoises, and their stranding events. So for stranded cetaceans, euthanasia is the use of humane techniques to induce rapid death for animals that are debilitated and have low survival likelihood. There are a number of methods for cetacean euthanasia, but today I'll focus on ballistics. Ballistics aims to cause brainstem destruction, which should result in instantaneous and irreversible insensibility. However, there's limited assessment of euthanasia procedures and little knowledge of their welfare impacts. So this study undertook a detailed examination of current ballistics procedures and animal responses to infer potential welfare impacts. We collected opportunistic video footage during 14 euthanasia events involving 5 cetacean species. Time to insensibility was estimated as the time from the initial shot to the observation of a continuously slack lower jaw and relaxation of the apaxial musculature. Time to death was assessed as the time at which there had been no behavioural occurrence for at least 15 seconds. We also collected reported time to insensibility and death from the markspersons involved and used the video footage to assess compliance with mandated procedures for verifying insensibility. Based on behaviour, 8 animals were likely unconscious within 30 seconds. 4 animals appeared to be conscious for 30 seconds after the initial shot, and half of these were likely still conscious after 1 minute. Only 2 of the 14 animals were apparently dead within 30 seconds. 9 were alive 1 minute after the first shot, and 2 for 5 minutes after the first shot. Markspersons were only observed to verify unconsciousness in 2 of the 14 animals. In both cases, this occurred for 30 seconds after the initial shot, but it was reported to occur much sooner. Generally, death was reported to occur more quickly than was suggested by behaviour, and we actually found 10 animals displayed behaviours, including tail lifting, beyond the time to death that was reported by markspersons. However, reported time to death was often consistent with estimates of insensibility based on behaviour. So overall, most animals were probably unconscious relatively rapidly and likely dead within minutes, which is arguably a more expedited death than would occur naturally following stranding. However, there were discrepancies between reported and behaviourally estimated time to death, and these need to be considered when using records to assess welfare impacts. Importantly, we found a lack of verification of insensibility and death following ballistics, and so we recommend additional training be undertaken on the confirmation of unconsciousness and death. I'd like to thank you all for listening. This study is published open access and can be found through the QR code, and please feel free to get in touch if you have any questions. Thank you.
My name is Hannah Zodu from Addis Ababa University, Ethiopia, and I am pleased to present our study titled Bridging Knowledge Gaps, the Role of Training in Improving Working Equid Welfare. This study was conducted in collaboration with Addis Ababa University and the University of Melbourne. In Ethiopia, working equids are essential for livelihoods, especially in rural and peri-urban communities. Despite their value, their welfare is often compromised, mainly due to inappropriate harnessing practices. Previous studies have reported very high rates of harness-related wounds, with prevalence reaching up to 95% in some towns. However, owners often lack access to technical guidance, and many do not understand the connection between poor equipment and injuries. So this study aimed to measure how common equipment-related wounds are in working equids and identify key risk factors related to owner behavior and technical knowledge. The study was conducted between February and May 2022 in 3 towns of Ethiopia. We examined 368 working equids for equipment-related wounds using a standardized protocol. Corresponding interviews were done with owners and cart drivers, focusing on harness type, usage, and owner knowledge. And the data were entered into REDCap and analyzed in our software. We focused assessment of wound on key components of the harness system that include the brace collar, the saddle, the traces, each of which has a potential to cause injury if improperly used or poorly fitted. We found that 73% of equids had at least one equipment-related wound, mostly on pressure points like the chest and the whizzer, yet only 29% of owners reported taking any preventive action. Most owners, over 93%, believed their harness were correctly assembled and 94% thought they were efficient, but our assessment showed that none of the harnesses were fully adequate. This gap between owner perception and technical reality shows why training is essential. In summary, most equipment-related injuries are preventable, but without training, owners are unlikely to identify poor fit or know how to fix it. This study clearly shows the need for community-based training program focused on practical, hands-on learning. We sincerely thank all equid owners, participants who share their time, as well as our research team and advisors for their support. And finally, thank you all for your attention. If you'd like to know more, please visit our poster at the conference. I would be happy to discuss or collaborate further.
I will be talking today about our study into Boas in the Boston Terrier and looking at this in the context of the more popular bulldog breeds. The French and English bulldog have been incredibly popular in recent years. Unfortunately, these flat-faced dogs are susceptible to brachycephalic obstructive airway syndrome, i.e. BOAS, a disease that results in difficult and noisy breathing. BOAS has been extensively studied in these popular breeds, but we know less about others, such as the Boston Terrier. The Boston Terrier is particularly interesting because it shares a lot of similarities with the bulldog breeds, namely the screw-tailed phenotype, which is associated with the DVL2 gene. Therefore, in this study, we aim to compare the prevalence and severity of BOAS in the Boston Terriers with the 2 bulldog breeds and explore which physical traits might be linked to a higher BOAS risk. 104 Boston Terriers were recruited from pet owners, breeders, and at dog shows. We used respiratory function grading to score the dog's breathing from grade 0 to 3. This involves listening to the dog's breathing before and after a 3-minute exercise test. We also used whole body barometric plethysmography, and we took a number of detailed physical measurements. The promising news was that as a whole, Boston Terriers had less severe BOAS than the bulldog breeds, with significantly more grade 0 dogs. 73% of Boston Terriers were clinically unaffected, that is grade 0 to 1, and only 1 Boston Terrier scored grade 3, meaning that it seems relatively rare for Boston Terriers to get severe BOAS. Certain physical features were associated with higher BOAS risk, including flatter-faced Boston Terriers, Those with abnormal scleral show, so more whites of their eyes on show, more severe nostril stenosis, and proportionally thicker necks, so more heavily set dogs. Finally, just putting this into context with the two other breeds. So in all three breeds, both nostril stenosis and a thicker neck, so higher neck girth ratio, have been associated with a higher BOAS risk. Interestingly, the Boston Terrier has a lower craniofacial ratio than the other two breeds, despite being apparently much less affected by BOAS. This could suggest that the other factors are more important when it comes to BOAS risk. The Boston Terrier is shaped more athletic than the heavily set Bulldog breeds, and you can see on the screen the differences in the neck girth ratio. Nevertheless, whilst Boston Terriers could be viewed as less affected than the Bulldog breeds, we still need to be mindful of their risk of BOAS and the tendency to extreme conformation, which could increase the risk of disease. Thank you for listening. If you would like further detail, please check out our paper or poster in this conference, and I look forward to answering any questions later on.
Everyone, my name is Valeria Bocchi. Today I am presenting a preliminary study on the current management of calves in Italian dairy farm. The objectives of this study were to describe the current calf breeding procedure in Italian dairy farm, analyze potential factors related to calf mortality and morbidity, and suggest good practice to improve welfare of dairy calves in Italy. So we developed an online questionnaire that was structured in 3 parts: farming background and experience, sex, age, level of education, and so on, general health management, and calf management. Here I am presenting the data collecting during the first month of dissemination. So we found that the most common farms in Italy feature more than 100 lactating dairy cows here in yellow, and more than 100 births per year in green, an average daily milk production of more than 30 liters per cows here in the purplish color, and a mortality rate of less than 5% for female calves during the first 4 weeks of life, here in light blue. Then a binomial regression model was used to identify the long fiber allowance as a factor significantly linked to a high female mortality rate. In particular, farms that provide fiber to the calves from the first week of life has higher chance of high mortality rate than farms that provide fiber immediately or from the first week of life. In literature, we found that long fiber allowance is suggested because it promotes healthy morphology of the rumen wall, also increases starter feed intake and ruminal pH, and reduces non-nutritive oral behavior. To conclude, despite further investigation are required to understand the correlation between long fiber allowance and survival of the calves, we recommend to provide long fiber to the calves in the first week of life. Thank you all for your attention. To discover our finding regarding morbidity and more detailed discussion, I warmly invite you to come see my poster. If you have any question, I'd be happy to answer them now or in the poster section. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all our speakers there for some really great and interesting talks. I would invite you all to turn your cameras on so that I can feed you some questions, because there's quite a few that have come in the chat. Fabulous. So I think while the rest of you are joining, I have a question, Wanju, for you. From Talia Lewis. She says, you listed some great recommendations based on your survey. What do you think the public uptake will be for those suggested changes for potential dog owners? I think you might need, oh, there we go.
Hi. Thanks for the question. I think maybe we can do some educational to Sorry. Um, I think we can do some educational before like getting the dog, so like some cooperation with the animal protection organization and tell them our idea, our finding, so they can give them the the finding and teach them and for the owners before getting the dog.
Yeah, so that kind of early education is really important.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Rebecca, thank you so much for your talk. It was really interesting. I have a question from Stephen Wickens, who asked, did where the shot was delivered make a difference, or was it more of a size or species issue that was linked to some of the variation in findings?
So thank you very much for the question. So I think that the location of shot in these cases did potentially make a difference, but something that actually potentially made more of a difference was the type of projectile that was used, so the type of bullet. Unfortunately, there was only maybe 2 or 3, or in some cases 1 animal from each species, and so it's really difficult to determine at this point whether species made a difference for these particular individuals. But we do know that between all of the different cetacean species that there are a lot of morphological differences, so it's something that we want to look into further.
It's really interesting. Thank you very much. Hannah, a question for you. So you talked about the value of training in relation to kind of owners who are potentially seeing more of the, or treating more of the wounds on their equids. What has worked previously in terms of training and thinking about how this might be delivered? Oh, I think you've frozen, Hannah.
Hannah, you might want to turn off your camera and then just have the mic, because it might work better. And also you might just want to check which microphone you're using. So perhaps better we come back to her and ask her.
Sounds good. Brilliant. I'll move on to Francesca. So again, another really interesting talk. So in relation to kind of the Boston Terrier, it's the thinking about the breed standard. Does the standard prioritize kind of lighter weights, different features compared to the Bulldog? And is that possibly why some of the differences were seen in your study?
Hi, thank you for the question. Yeah, it does. Yeah, so it talks about more athletic sort of breed. I thought as well it was interesting that the standard asked for a sort of snout length of 1/3 of the cranial length, but we were seeing with the dogs that we measured, they were actually sort of falling short of that. So I think there is a bit of a difference between some of the dogs that are out there versus the breed standard.
That's in place. Oh, that's really interesting. Thank you. Valeria, I have a question from Berta Nielsen here. So based on your findings, how can farmers be made more aware of the importance of calf welfare?
Oh, okay, thank you for the amazing question. Well, actually, also from the willingness to participate in the survey, we can see that they are very interested in implement the welfare of their calves. Also, we ask a question about if they somewhat knew about the EFSA scientific opinion on welfare of calves, and actually the majority of them did somewhat know about it, and about 30% of them actually read it. So they are very interested, but the question to how to transform this interest in action, I think will come by maybe a change in the EU and of course in the Italian legislation.
Brilliant, thank you. Francesca, I have another question for you in the chat from David Sargan, who says the respiratory functional grading test has been widely adopted in many countries for testing the bulldog breeds by individually trained veterinarian. Tests for the Boston and in future tests for another number of breeds who suffer similar issues are being rolled out. Is it possible to make sure that these tests are correctly used for all breeds that may need it?
So yeah, I guess that sort of depends on the individual assessors using the test correctly. I think sort of at the moment there is a bit of a difference between the test with the pugs and the bulldog breeds. So I think there are differences within the different breeds. I think there are talks about using stethoscopes, so using an audio recording and using AI to be able to get an objective measure. So that relies a little bit less on individual assessors.
That sounds really great. Thank you very much for that. Well, I think we've reached the time for the end of this session. So thank you very much to all of our speakers for their talks, but also their response to the questions as well. We have a break now, and if you could all be back at 12 UK time, that would be very much appreciated so we can start properly for the final session. And thank you again.